Welcome to this question and answer session where Stephen Davey answers questions about the Bible and the Christian faith. Here's the question of this episode.
Hello, this is Janet speaking from Maine. I have a question. Revelation 18 speaks of the great Babylon, which will fall during the tribulation and be destroyed in 1 hour. The shipmasters who trade with her by sea will cry over her burning destruction. I've heard some interpret that chapter as speaking of the political Babylon, who they say could be USA. Any truth to that? Thank you very much.
Janet, thank you so much for calling. Stephen, Revelation 18 and this Babylon that's mentioned there.
Yes, a great question. Thank you, Janet. If we go back to chapter 17 and sort of get a running start, I'll mention a few verses to this excellent question. But let me begin by saying this. There are two cities that are mentioned in the Bible more than any other cities. They are Jerusalem, that appears the most, about 800 times. It's a literal city. It will be rebuilt. The Lord will reign there in the city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, shalom, means the city of peace, the foundation of peace. It isn't peaceful now. It isn't the place of peace. It will be one day. And that is the place, however, where God marked the potential for peace. Why? Because that's where Jesus, his son, hung on the cross. The other city mentioned most often is the city of Babylon. And if you go all the way back to Genesis, you find it featured as the first city of rebellion. And then throughout the Bible, it's going to be mentioned 300 more times. It's going to show up first in Genesis 10, and guess what? It shows up again in Revelation 17, 18, and 19, where it is destroyed. So think of it this way. Just as the city of Jerusalem represents the plans and the purpose and the salvation related to the kingdom of God, there is another literal city, Babylon, that throughout the history of mankind represents the plans and the purposes of man and the kingdom of darkness. Now we know that Babylon began under Nimrod. Go back to Genesis chapter 9. You have the command for mankind to fill the earth. Nimrod defies that decree to Noah, and he basically builds a one world. We could call it a one world federation of nations. He builds a city where it defies God through its false religion. Certainly, they build a tower that reaches to the heavens. You might think, well, it's going to be really tall. Well, it actually represents the heavens. That is, they created the zodiac and they began to worship the planets and the stars. They began to worship creation rather than the creator. Of course, Genesis 11 is where God judges Nimrod. He judges that city, and the tower confuses the language. And consider the fact that while it was dispersed, the population at that point in time, Babylon was never completely abandoned. It continued to grow. Later on, it'll have a king ruling it named Nebuchadnezzar. 500 years before the birth of Christ, according to Herodotus, the historian. We have no reason to assume he isn't telling the truth, but the capital city of Babylon flourished. Nebuchadnezzar had these hanging gardens, more than likely Satan's attempt to mimic the Garden of Eden. It was bordered by an amazing wall. It was quite a capital. Daniel prophesies that Babylon will fall. And by the way, where is Daniel when he prophesies that? In Babylon. He's right there. He prophesies it'll fall to the Medes and Persians and ultimately go through all of these kingdoms. It is, in fact, destroyed or conquered, I should say, later by Alexander the Great. He decides to make it his capital city. He, of course, dies, fails to fulfill that vision. Later on, Napoleon, in his desire to rule the world, wanted to make Babylon his world headquarters. He intended to rebuild the ancient city, and he too, of course, failed. We know that Iraq, which is the country in which Babylon exists, sits on the largest known crude oil reserves in the world. People are not going to forget about Babylon. They're going to want it. In fact, we know one world ruler in our lifetime, Saddam Hussein, who spent millions of dollars doing what? Rebuilding the palace of Nebuchadnezzar. He used the same plot of ground. He believed that he would become a dominant world leader. He even excavated and rebuilt the Gate of Ishtar, one of the primary gates that led into the city of Babylon, a gate through which Daniel walked as a teenager. So I say all of that. I know this is a long answer, and I'm sorry about that, but all the way from Genesis 11 to Revelation, you have interest in this city, a city that just doesn't go away. And we have every reason to take these prophecies literally, that the Antichrist will rebuild Babylon, and that will be the headquarters of his kingdom. And the first war that occurred in the Bible between Jerusalem and Babylon, it will be the place of the final battle. Those two cities, once again, are at each other. As Nimrod represents, and the Antichrist, his descendant representing him, battles the forces of God and Christ ruling in Jerusalem, and the battle will take place. It's going to be a marvelous thing because we know how it ends. So we're not biting our nails. So we have in chapters 17 and 18 the details of Babylon. In chapter 17 of Revelation, we have the religious system and the demise of that religious system. In chapter 18, we have the political system that's wrapped into Babylon and how that is destroyed. Okay, now to your question, Babylon is not America. It is a literal city in Iraq. It will be rebuilt, and it will become the headquarters of the Antichrist as he seeks to rule the world.
Thanks for listening today. This has been a production of Wisdom for the Heart. To learn more about our ministry, visit wisdomonline.org and be sure and hit the subscribe button to be notified of new episodes.